Well, alrighty then, boys and girls. So now here's the final project for the 1 point perspective, and you will see that it's a little bit larger than what we've been doing the other ones with, and it's on a different quality paper. And even though I've got a drawing right here, what I want you to do is I want you to make your own drawing. In fact, I will not accept a copy of my drawing, right? That being said, there's nothing magical about it. You can see I've got a vanishing point. It's right here. And you can see I've got this is lining up to the vanishing point, and these are lining up to the vanishing points, and these and these. And, the placement of all the different things that I've got, I've used every trick that we've learned so far. These are all lining up to the vanishing points to make these steps, etc., etc. This goes over to the edge so that I have the windows at the same height as the one over here. I've drawn an X to divide my space up. I've used that same thing as we did in the train tracks in order to get these all the same size. With the boats down here, these are actually 1, 2, 3 cubes put together, and that's how I decided, I was going to make my boats about 3 times as long as they were wide. That seemed about right for a rowboat to me. Then I did the same thing. This is just a rowboat here in perspective, but as you can see, I just moved it over a little bit, just like I did with the one with the UFOs and the cactuses, or the guy in the mall, just using the same size, but just putting it in a slightly different place, right? So that's the right size. But it doesn't have to be super lined up. With the texture, I've just kept it really simple, a lot of open area, because what I'm going to do next is I'm going to watercolor paint it, right? A little bit different repertoire. Okay, so we're just going to use some watercolor paints, just some good old class ones, whatever. And hopefully you will find them nice. Please put them away nice. That just makes everything nice for the next people. Okay, all good. And my hope is that even though, even though with the drawings that we've been doing, the exercises, I should say, that we made full-on drawings out of them, right? Mostly you were probably copying exactly what I did, etc. Let me get that out of the glare. Um, but with this one, I really want you to make it your own finished artwork. Okay, so since I'm teaching you something new, I'm teaching you the watercolor, I'm going to start by giving you just a little bit of a primer on watercolor. Okay, so let me put this aside for a second. First thing, here's one of our drawing boards. Do not use one of our drawing boards because the drawing boards need to stay nice and flat and hopefully clean, right? So that when we lay down a single sheet of paper, perhaps on the paper, excuse me, on the board, it doesn't, get it all textury, For the painting, what we'll use is we've got other larger boards, and as you can see, they're all messed up. But that's okay, because I'm not doing fine drawing on them, so I don't have to worry about there being a bit of texture on the board. I'm going to be painting on there, so it's okay. Okay. The next thing you need to know is that for our purposes in the classroom, I'm not going to be using real, let's say, watercolor paper, I'm just going to be using some nice 80-pound drawing paper. It's the same thing as we use when we do our sketchbooks and stuff, right? And that will work fine for the classroom. Maybe if you're working at home and if you have some nice watercolor paper, then cool, use that. Now, the thing about using a water-based paint on paper is that, of course, the paper is going to get all wrinkly. The reason it gets all wrinkly is because the water is absorbed by the paper and it expands, right? The paper gets bigger, right? And it doesn't do it in a nice uniform way. It just goes whatever way it's going to go, right? And that's okay. But we want it to dry flat and nice when it's all done. So what we have to do is we have to tape it down so that when the water dries, it has no place to go but to be flat. So I'm going to take a piece of tape like this, Just masking tape, just regular masking tape. I'm tearing it off the roll and I'm putting it onto my fingers. You can see right there. I think that it's important to take it off the roll because then I can look through and I can see I've got it halfway on, halfway off, and that way it's going to be nice and firm because that expansion of the paper can actually pull the paper right out of the tape or pull the tape right off the board. It's really very powerful. So once again, I take the roll, I get it to about the size I need, and I tear it off. Right? If I was taping a whole wall, sure, I would have the whole roll in my hand at a time. But I'm not taping a wall, I'm just taping it on a piece of paper. And this way I have total control over it. And I can kind of look through and get it all just so. I might even take and flatten the paper out to make sure that it's all nice and flat. The other thing, I don't know if you've noticed it, but I'm taping in parallel. Okay, you don't want to tape all the way around. You want to tape in parallel. Okay, or the top and bottom first, doesn't matter. Okay. This works fine, just this skinny tape for this drawing paper because it's not super strong. If you had regular watercolor paper, real watercolor paper, then you might need to use a fatter tape or a wet tape, or you might staple it down to a board. There's many different ways you can do it, but that's because the paper is a much stronger paper, so that pulling force is going to be much greater. Okay, so like I say, I've just got these classroom style wet, or excuse me, dry watercolors here. And so nothing special, but they're nice. They're just fine. You know, any of the brands are fine. I like the Prangs are good, the Crayolas, whatever. Doesn't matter. And now as far as the brushes that you should use, you don't need a whole slew of brushes. I find that the kids, what they do is they get a whole bunch of different brushes, and then that's just, you know, a bunch of different brushes that they'll probably have to wash up and deal with at the end of class. I tend to use one brush when I'm painting something, or not many at least. And I find it's good because, A, I'm lazy and I don't want to clean up a bunch of brushes, but I get really good with that one brush. That being said, this is the type of brushes that you might want. This right here is going to be your wash brush for putting down large bunches of paint. Here's sort of a medium-sized brush. Maybe we get one that was a little bit smaller. Maybe you get a medium-sized brush that's more like this. That's fine, right? And then maybe a smaller brush for details, maybe. We'll see if you need it. But with all of these brushes, they are soft. They are soft brushes, okay? And normally you would probably want to use soft brushes, in opposed to this. This is a bristle brush. This we'd use more for acrylics and oils. And it's a good brush. It can take a lot of abuse. It's great. It might not be as refined as we want for watercolor. Okay. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just doing a little practice sheet right here. And since the work that you're going to do is going to have, you know, kind of heavy, you know, drawn outlines on it and stuff like that, for our purposes right now, that's fine. We're just going to be colorizing it more or less. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing here. So let's say I just had a little color wheel. Okay, we'll just have a wheel. I'll divide it into thirds more or less. Maybe I'll have a little bit of a landscape here with some trees, just for the purposes of, you know, messing around and teaching us a little something. Okay, good enough, good enough. And you know, what I'm showing you here is not the be all and end all of watercolor painting. It's just one way of going about it. Okay, so here I've got a little bit of water, of course, right? And I've got some paper towel. Very important to have some paper towel. Okay, watch this. You're gonna think, Mr. Coon, you've really lost it. I'm gonna put a wash of water on this whole thing. So I've just got clear water. And then I've got just a wash of water on this whole thing. Okay. And so now I'm going to take a little bit of blue and a little bit of this right here. Not a lot. I can always add more. It's hard to add less. And do I get a little bit of blue color? Yes, I do. Look at that. So I'm just going to put in a little bit of blue right in here. Now, when I'm doing this, I'm thinking about what colors will mix with what colors. And you'll see more of what I mean by that in a second. But I know with what I'm doing here, blue is just going to mix into everything just fine. Okay, so I've got a little bit of blue on there. If I wanted to, I could add a little bit more blue, let's say up on the top here, you know, with that atmospheric perspective, and a little bit more blue up here. Okay, that's good. And I'm not going to get too crazy with it, just adding a little bit there. Okay. So then once I've got all that, I think what I'll do is be a little bit more specific in what I'm doing here. So I think I'll take a little bit more of this blue and start creating my color wheel. Okay, so here's blue, and you'll see it's going to blur outside the lines, but I'm not worried about that for now. There is a technique called wet into wet, where we can set up a little puddle of water and it will really stay very, you know, it's very set in that thing and you can do wonderful work in it. But that's a lesson for another day. All I wanted to do was darken this up a little bit here, maybe get a little bit darker up here. Okay, yeah, let's pull this down somehow so we can see this a little bit more here. What about that? Maybe that's better. Who knows? Okay, so a little bit of that, and if I need to stretch it out, a little bit more water on my brush, and maybe just, you know, got a bigger, softer brush, just to spread that out a little bit. Cool. And so let's take a look at this blue right here. So the blue is a primary color, and we'll do a lot more on color theory as we go along, but another primary color would be red. So I'm going to get a little bit of water on my brush here, a little bit of red, maybe mix into my tray a little bit just to see where I'm going with that. Okay, cool. So I've got a little bit of red right here. Okay. And you know, I want to darken these trees up. So watch this. There's already blue there, right? I'm going to throw a little bit of red, maybe a little bit more water right here. See, I use the water to change the value. Did you notice how when I put water on it, it made it a lot lighter value? Here, watch this one, for instance. So here I've got some straight red, right? And it's going to be really pretty dark, isn't it? But once I added a little bit more water into it, it diluted it, and it used the white of the paper to make it a lighter color. So I've got this red right here. You're like, oh my gosh, Mr. Coon, why are you drawing red trees? Well, you'll see. You know, maybe a little bit of red down here in this hill. And maybe even a little bit more red down here in this part. We'll be making some forms here. Okay, a little bit. And maybe use that water to blend it up. And my paper is all bumpy now, but I don't care. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay, cool. All right, so now let's see what happens when we have the blue and the red, right? Well, I think you know what's going to happen. It's going to make purple. So let's mix a little bit of purple. So I've got that blue into this red, and look at that. I'm getting a nice purple tone. Okay, cool. Here. And it's making a darker color. So and I want these trees to be a little bit darker than what's around them, so I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit more blue into them, maybe even giving them a little bit of shape as I do so. Right? Maybe some here, maybe some here. You know, be free. Be free with yourself. Don't get too boggled down with stuff. Okay. And okay, clean off my brush. Now notice when I'm cleaning my brush, I don't get in there and just swirl around a lot like that. What I do is I get a little bit of water on there, and if I need to, I'll just take the paper towel and wipe it off on the paper towel. Because if I pollute that water, if I swish it around in there, just change the color of the water, then it's hard to keep my colors pure. Okay. And I'm just going to blend this a little bit. I want it to be mostly kind of blue because I'm about to add my other primary color in here. Okay, all good. There, and even a little bit here. Okay, so my other primary color, see a little bit of water right there. My other primary color is yellow. So I'm going to take a little bit of yellow, maybe mix that into the tray a little bit. I am kind of a strong believer in primaries because I think that instead of using, let's say, the green that it comes with, which you could, I do, right? But instead of relying on that mostly I'd mix my own green or my own purple or my own oranges, right? Because I think that the colors are more live usually. So look at that. I've got this yellow, right? So let's see what happens when we mix this little bit of yellow into this blue. Well, of course, we're going to get green, aren't we? Okay, especially as we blend those together. And the type of green that you get is really all dependent on how much yellow or how much blue you put in. So now I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of yellow into my trees here. Okay, doing a no-no already. I'm going to clean that off a little bit. See, because I don't want to be doing my mixing in here, in these guys. Here, clean that off, especially the yellows. You know how the ooky they can get. So I want to make my color here in the trays. Anyway, so back to this. And I've got that little bit of yellow going on here and here. I'm getting all kinds of beautiful variations in the colors. And before I touch that yellow again, I'm going to clean this off, clean it off. Okay, now I can touch that yellow again. That's how I keep these nice and clean. I mix in my tray, not in the colors themselves, right? Because I don't want to pollute those colors. Okay, so here we go. Oh, good. So now, I don't want these sort of rainbow colored trees and hills and stuff like that. I want them to be green, right? So I'm going to go ahead and come back with my blue color right here, right? And we'll see how they start to turn green. Okay, now I'm going to have the most color when I first dip it in, so I'm going to go into the darkest area, the area that I want it to be darkest. Oh, and look at that. See, little by little, I'm getting greens, but I'm getting beautiful different variations of greens and khakis and more blue greens and more yellow greens in here. Some browns going on. There we go. There. And a little bit more in here, starting in my darkest area, and then working it up into here, and you see getting these nice green tones. And if I want some area to stay very light, then I need to conserve the lightness of the paper. So in other words, if I need it to be like absolutely white, then, you know, don't paint in that area, right? If I needed to just be a lighter color, then like in here, just use very little paint. And you can see how this is starting to come out. Okay, and we're getting a very nice couple of hills and couple of trees. Now, is it totally a no-no to use green? No, of course not. Here's a little bit of water area. Here's a little bit of green. Okay, and just throw maybe a little stronger than that. Okay, and I could just throw a little green in there. There you go. But look, you see how kind of fakey that green looks? That's why I don't, use those secondaries. Because look at that color versus this rich green down here. You know, like I say, I could use a little bit of it, but boy, I'll tell you, those secondary colors, and that's the colors that you get, the yellow, the red, the blue, those are your primary colors, right? But the secondary colors that you get, they just don't look as good as your primary, excuse me, as the secondary colors that you make. So like here, let's look at this orange that we're making right here. Here, let's get that, and a little bit of this red. You'll see, look at that beautiful orange. Look at that, how nice that is. Okay, anyways, so that's your basic primer on watercolor. I'm not gonna go into it too much more than that. I could use a little bit of black. Ooh, look at how dark that black was. Right, that's why I kind of avoid that. But here I can spread it up. Maybe a little bit here. Okay. It's a funny thing to me that people, even when they do really nice with pencil, it takes them a while to get used to the idea of paint. But you know what? Think of a paintbrush and paints like this as a really, really cool set of markers. And then it won't be quite so foreign to you. Because most of you guys, you can do markers, you can deal with that. So just think about paints as markers. Okay, well, that's our little primer. And so next I'll get into actually coloring in my drawing. Maybe I'll show you parts of it, maybe, not all of it, probably. And, hopefully you'll pick up a thing or two and be inspired to do your own.